Hello and welcome into this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack. With me is friend and colleague Erik Skopil. Erik, how are we doing today?
You caught me right in the sip there.
I do the same thing every time, man.
I know,
You
I
should
know.
know by this point.
Well, I do the same thing. I'm trying to cheers to the listeners with my glass. Life's good. It's raining outside. That was different. It was like 93 degrees yesterday. Today, not so much. But you know what? We're good, and it's fun having a game to look forward to this week. Even
That's
though
nice.
last week I think I was kind of like looking forward to having a weekend off. I'm kind of excited to get back and see some football and see where this team's at. And as we'll get into in the show, as we kind of look at UCLA a little bit, a game that I would imagine should end very favorably for Oregon based upon at least everything I've seen so far. And certainly if you didn't miss or if you didn't listen to our podcast with Bruin Report Online's David Woods for Tuesday's show where he came on, they don't think they're very good either. So
It's always reassuring. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because we do these podcasts and it goes one of two other ways. When I interview the opposing insider, I'm either like, oh boy, I'm totally wrong. There's a lot of this guy thinks this team's pretty good. Like there's some confidence. Maybe I need to reassess. And then there's days like yesterday where I'm like, oh, maybe I was right. Maybe this team isn't very good and nobody thinks they're good.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the opposing writers that we interview know about the team. That's kind of the job. So they should have a better beat on it than we sure do. But today on this podcast, like we do every Wednesday, we're going to talk some injuries with Oregon, with UCLA, because I think they have a couple of interesting injuries going on their front too. And we're going to dive into a little bit of what UCLA does. If you didn't listen to the podcast yesterday, that'll be a much deeper dive. But we're going to give our opinions of what we've seen on the field with UCLA. For the injury designations going on here, I think we have to start with Matthew Bedford, who was injured prior to the season, came back. I think he had 1 or 2 snaps against Oregon State at the very end of the game in their victory formation. Dan on Monday let us know that during the bye week he was dinged up. We saw him at practice on Tuesday. Let me go back. Would you say that's a re-ding, a new ding?
I wanted to get into that with you.
Yeah,
I actually don't know 100% if it's the same injury.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure either. I was thinking more of just the terminology. Like, he was already dinged up. This is a re-ding. What are we doing here?
I see.
Yeah, but we saw him at practice on Tuesday. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, and we did not see him at practice today. So neither of us expected him to play this weekend. Maybe even if he was fully healthy, I think this would have been the week to play him had he been healthy because he got the bye week. But with this new injury and what we saw at practice on Tuesday, we did not expect him to play this upcoming Saturday. That is still the case, especially considering we did not see him today, Wednesday, during practice. So this puts Oregon right where they were before. There's no Matthew Bedford on the horizon.
Yeah, and I guess it helps that you saw, I would say, significantly better offensive line play against Oregon State. Mm-hmm. So that gives you at least a little bit of confidence that this group can do it. But I think the reality is this is your group now. And we were talking about in the bye week of, now you got musical chairs along the offensive line. How is this going to work out? Who's in, who's out? Well, this made things a little easier for you. And just in terms of what we did see, and again, not a lot of practice opportunity in terms of actually watching things, but he is pretty badly hobbled. He has a hard time getting from drill to drill. I don't want to make it sound like the guy can't walk because that's not the case. But this is clearly somebody who's not able to play football right now. It was great seeing him in pads on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. The fact that we didn't see him Wednesday, along with the fact of what we did see on Tuesday, I think makes it very clear he's not available this week. And I'll be honest, this might be a guy we're not seeing very much at all this season. I don't know. It's hard to kind of get a feel for the entirety of what this is going to be for him, but certainly the timeline of, hey, maybe he's back late September, early October, which is kind of what we'd been hearing before, that has certainly changed. And this is somebody who I would be stunned if he's available to play against Ohio State, if I'm being honest. And frankly, who knows the rest of the way, but I don't want to do too much conjecture there other than to say, this looks like somebody who's really dealing with it and is having a hard time just moving around. So really feel for him. I mean, it's a tough way for this season to go, and now you kind of just, as an Oregon fan, you just recognize what we've seen on the field is probably what it's going to be for at least the first half plus a little bit more of the season, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think we need to go too in depth here. We've had a million. I think that might be a little low on how many offensive line discussions we've had through 3 games of the regular season. So I don't think we need to go too into it. It does really suck for Bedford, I will say that, because he's the projected starter, all these other good things. Really good dude to talk to. So this sucks to see that he's just not playing. And I think he would be a really like a fan favorite amongst Oregon fans, because he's big, he's mean, but he's also really cordial and a nice guy to talk to on the side. And I think, from all like the tape that I watched preseason, like he looked like a really good player, like a really good addition to the offensive line. It would certainly help. So that's that. Moving on to the next injuries. No, go ahead.
Well, I just had one thing. Like, do we, like, I guess fans probably want to know what I'm still not 100% sure on of, is this a re-aggravation of a pre-existing injury, or do we think this is, and again, now we're kind of speculating, but like, did this resemble what we thought he had before, or do we think there's a chance that this is something totally different that he's now dealing with?
So, yeah, I don't remember what leg he was injured with before. I genuinely don't remember if it was left or right.
Pretty sure it was his right.
Well, he's limping pretty heavy with his right leg from just watching him walk into practice. So I would imagine this is a re-aggravation. It could be an entirely new injury, or it's more likely to just be a re-aggravation, because when you hurt something, you have to get it to heal. So it's already not at 100%. And if you do something that hits it again or does something different, like that's the piece of your leg, arm, chest, whatever, that's probably going to be the most damage and whatever the possibility is. So I imagine it's a re-aggravation. I don't think we'll ever know. Well, maybe not ever, but I don't know if that'll ever be publicly stated from an Oregon head coach. So I don't think that we'll know for sure. But if I had to guess, it would be a re-aggravation, because it seemed, again, like a leg injury, which he had, preseason.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that part, because the reason there might be some uncertainty is Dan didn't specifically say re-injured or there's a setback. He said dinged, which, again, could mean a multitude of things. But I just wanted to
could mean anything.
It really could. I just wanted to have that little point of like, I'm with you. I think it is the same thing probably, but we don't know, and maybe that helps some listener kind of try to figure out, like, okay, is this a new thing? Is this an old thing? What have you?
Yeah. A little speculation job by us, but that's okay. Moving on. Other injuries: Gary Bryant Jr., Dave Iuli, a couple other guys who have been pretty prominent in us getting asked questions, us asking questions to Dan about the status of these two guys. Did the same again today at Wednesday at Dan Lanning's press conference. Dan said that Gary Bryant Jr. is down. Again, really open-ended answer there, and that they're trying to get him back, and when he's back, they will utilize him. So that sounds like somebody who's injured. But I still don't know, A, what the original injury was, and B, where he's been for nearly like the last month. So like that's the thing with Gary, was he was practicing. He was obviously hurt beforehand, was back at practice, was suited up against Idaho and Boise State. Did not make the road game to Oregon State, even though they brought everybody. There was no limit on how many guys they could bring. So that was kind of a red flag. And then we didn't go to practice at all during the bye week, so we were unable to see if he practiced then. We come to practice Tuesday, Wednesday, no Gary Bryant. Asked the question, he's down, according to Dan. So again, that it would just be a lot of speculation going on here if we were to say what he's injured with or whatever it is.
Yeah, it would be even a further leap than the Bedford part, where at least we've set eyes on this person this week and have an idea of what's going on. Gary, as far as I could tell, I was looking back at my notes earlier today just to see how long it's been. I think the last time we saw him at all was the Boise State day, and the last time we saw him at practice was like September 4th. So this is like this is a pretty extended absence. Encouraging that Dan didn't say he's not with the team or he's left the team or something like that, but kind of keeps it pretty ambiguous when a guy who, again, we're not watching every practice. We get 15 minutes. It's possible he just they say, hey, media's out, and he just comes out and is doing everything, and or he's around at least. But we haven't set eyes on this guy for 3 weeks basically, and that's where I'm a little bit confused with what's going on. And there may be half a dozen different logical reasons for why that's the case, but we certainly have, I'd say, kind of a lack or an absence of understanding of what exactly is going on with Gary. To Jared's point, we don't know what the injury was to start. And this is a guy who's been dealing with this, I think he and Bedford were both dinged up on like the first scrimmage of fall, the second scrimmage. Like it's been a long time.
It's been a while, yeah.
And the answers from Dan have been very similar. So we're in a similar spot, I think, with Gary, with Jaleel Florence, and with Dave Iuli, where all three of these guys are dealing with injuries. Dan has communicated that, and there's really no conversation of timeline or specificity of a ramp up or if they're getting closer. So I wouldn't count on those three guys being available until some of the messaging changes or some of the practice participation changes, which is the hard part with Gary. Is it looked like he was getting closer, which is why he was listed as questionable, and now he's not around, which is, I think, part of why it's confusing. But I would just group those three guys together and say, unless something changes and Dan says something or there's a difference in practice participation, I just don't expect those three to be available for a while.
Yeah, and we asked Dan today about Dave Iuli as well, and it was basically the same answer. He said, like, yeah, same thing. Like, they're like hurt. We're trying to get him back. When he's back, we will utilize him. So that's not surprising. You know, Dave's been at basically all of the practices. He's just not really practicing. And Florence has been on and off. I think we touched on this the last time we did this podcast, where Tuesdays Jaleel is in like street clothes or trainers, and then Wednesdays he's like seemingly full go. So again, I said it was encouraging before Oregon State that Jaleel was like a full participant in a mod bracket drill. I didn't see if he was a full participant today because he was at the other side of the field and there's just bodies in front of me, so I can't see that side of the field. But he came into practice with full pads and cleats. So again, on paper, it's encouraging. Whether that means anything, probably not. Like, I guess we'll maybe find out on Saturday. If he travels, I think that's certainly a more encouraging sign. But I don't anticipate to see him playing football this Saturday against UCLA.
One last part on that is the travel participation will be really telling for a couple of these guys, because you're not traveling a player who has no chance of playing. So if a guy makes the trip, and especially one of these three guys who were kind of iffy on their status, that will be pretty telling, I think, of, hey, this guy's actually like, maybe he doesn't play on Saturday, but he's getting close, just like we saw with Bedford making the trip up to Corvallis and obviously getting in that game.
Right. To wrap up the injury stuff, just a PSA on guys who are out for the year again. And a lot of these happened preseason, so I'm sure plenty of people have forgotten by this point. Dakota Fields is certainly down for the year. I mean, Cam Alexander now has his number. I don't even know if we've really said anything about that yet, that Cam Alexander has changed from 18 to 11 this year. I believe an Oregon like official person said that was for like special teams reasons, where they just have more opportunities to play people on the field and don't have to change numbers and go through that hassle. So that's pretty indicting that he's not going to be playing this year. You don't give up somebody's number if there's a chance of him coming back. The other one is Michael Gardner, redshirt freshman defensive lineman, number 93, if the numbers matter nowadays. But yeah, I don't know if there's a timeline for him, if he's going to come back this season. We haven't seen him at practice or anything. We've seen him around the facilities. I can say that he's gone from being on a scooter to being in a walking boot. So that is certainly obvious progress, but I don't know if there's a timeline on him or anything. But I think that's so distant and not important to now that I don't think we need to go into that.
Yep. Those two guys, I wouldn't count on them this season. That's kind of where I'm at. And we have, I would say, more clarity about them because they've been absent and not around the team. And Dan has said so than those other three guys who are seemingly kind of in limbo. Like we have an idea with those two guys. Like they're dealing with pretty serious injuries. We don't necessarily know the specifics, but their lack of practice involvement and what Dan has said indicates one thing. The other three are kind of in a different category, I'd say, where there's possibility of them coming back and playing like anytime soon. But until we hear something or see something, it's going to be hard to kind of know those.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and kind of do a little deep dive into what we think of UCLA going into this Saturday. All right, we are back. For those watching on YouTube, you just saw us take a little break. For those listening, congrats on the ads. You're more than welcome. So Oregon takes on UCLA in their, get this, first Big Ten conference game of the season. Doesn't feel like it at all, mostly because they're playing UCLA, who, in case you didn't know, played in the Pac-12 with Oregon for a long time. Going down to the Rose Bowl, 8 p.m. start. Once again, East Coasters, you're welcome. This is a terrible opportunity. So for my parents who are probably listening, I'm terribly sorry that this game starts way past your bedtime. But let's kind of dive into it. They're 1-2 in the season, losses to Indiana and LSU this past week. Kind of hung tight with LSU, at least tie game at halftime. I'll be honest, I did not watch that game live. Michigan and USC were on, so that was on my television, but I did go back and rewatch the game. I think this is a feisty team. They have some talent. They do not have a lot of talent compared to Oregon. And I think that's kind of where I'm at in this one. Like you watch the Indiana game where Indiana's offense has been great this year. They couldn't stop a nosebleed that game. So I think that could be kind of indicative to how this game against Oregon goes.
I think Oregon has the player and personnel advantage and the coaching advantage. And the coaching part is something I'm really curious to see kind of play out live in the game on Saturday. Of like Deshaun Foster has not been well received there. I don't think the way they've, again, listening to Dave talk about it, I don't think the way that they've approached their offense or the way that they're kind of running everything has been real assuring to fans. And this is an offense that, again, we can get into some of the stats, is just like really bad statistically, has not been good at all so far. And I think some of that is talent. But as Dave said, I think 8 or 9 starters on offense are back. And yet the offense is
not great.
Worse than last year with the same guys. And obviously some of that's coaching and kind of scheme. And part of it is sort of what we saw with Oregon, is when you have some changes with, that quarterback in particular. They were kind of up and down there. And UCLA, last year, like sometimes it takes a little time to kind of get things going. But for 3 games, they certainly don't look like they have much of an offensive identity. And to me, it's more like what they aren't, which is, this is the worst run game in the country.
God, it's so bad.
And their head coach,
so bad.
Head coach was the running backs coach last year.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's the part where I'm going, like, that doesn't compute. Like, if you were to sell me on what part of a team your strength should be, it should be like, we all figured Dan would be probably a pretty good defensive, like Oregon was going to be a pretty good defensive program under Dan. And I think maybe it hasn't reached the colossal expectations of what Georgia did when he was their DC winning that championship. But
it's been pretty damn good.
Pretty freaking good. Like, they've got dudes and they seem like they know what they're doing. UCLA, his coach is a running backs coach, and they don't seem like they know what they're doing. And their offensive coordinator used to play running back, and yet they don't seem like they have really any semblance of a run game. And I actually thought TJ Harden was like kind of good last year. I was curious to see what kind of a player he would develop into, and yet through 3 weeks, he's averaging like 2.9 yards per carry. So for me, looking at UCLA, I come away going, certainly feels like they've taken a step back from a coaching perspective. And it really feels like offensively, their identity is to like try to throw the ball everywhere. Mm-hmm. And yet I don't know if that like kind of matches up with what they should be doing. They're kind of a mess. I kind of like some of their players individually. Like, I think Ethan Garber is just low key kind of like fun to watch. He makes a lot of things happen with his feet and is able to, extend plays and still look downfield and make some plays. But he's turnover prone. They don't have much of a run game. I actually think the receivers and tight ends are solid, but like, I don't know. I'm skeptical of this whole thing coming together. But what I guess I will say, to be a little bit more glass half full for the UCLA side, is they did show, at least against LSU last week, that they could hang around with a much superior team. And so while I do think, and we just ran through all of these kind of deficiencies, I wouldn't be surprised if this game is like somewhat competitive early on, just because UCLA does have some guys, and when they are not stepping all over themselves and not turning it over all the time, like they can move the football a little bit. But yeah, this is I think a favorable matchup for a lot of reasons for Oregon.
Yeah, certainly. UCLA does not have a single running back who's hit 100 yards this year in 3 games, so it's not great. They average 60 yards a game on 22 attempts. It's a bad rush team, and Oregon is a good rush defense. And I know the Boise State stuff, the Oregon State stuff in the first half, like they figured it out. Like I think that they can stop the run if they need to. And it'll be interesting to see what types of defenses Oregon plays, because like you said, Garber's just thrown it 97 times this year. That's absurd. Like Dylan Gabriel obviously didn't play the last half of the fourth quarter against Oregon State, but he has 94 attempts this year, and that's including a 49 attempt in game against Idaho. So like half of Dylan Gabriel's attempts came in one game. Like Garber's just thrown it 3 more times and is completing 56% of his passes for 3 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. So they are, like you said, Eric, are trying to move the ball down the field through the air. And I don't think that's going to work. Like, I don't think that's going to work on Oregon's defense. I don't think Garber's is good enough to do that. And I don't think that he's bad, but I think they're asking him to do, frankly, just too much. Like they need to have a good running game. And that's what UCLA's been the last couple of years. That's what Keon Ware Hudson said. He's like, the difference is like they can't run the ball. Not that they can't, but he said that last couple of years under Chip Kelly, they've had good running backs like Zach Charbonnet they had, and Carson Steele they had last year, where they could ground and pound. They had all these motions and everything to try to get them advantageous positions on the field. And I think that's just kind of gone. And it's a really kind of milk toasty offense that just tries to move the ball down the field through the air. And I just don't think it's going to work against Oregon's defense, who they're as good as I think their defensive line is. Their secondary has been awesome this year.
Yeah.
And, this will be a real test for guys like Dante Manning and Nico Reed, who I think were higher on. Like we all know Jabbar Muhammad's the best corner on the team, but Manning and Reed have played really well this season. This will be an opportunity to show, like, hey, is this legit? Like, can they sustain this level of playing throughout the course of the year? And they're going to get attacked this game, like no matter what, even if Oregon's up by 100, like they're going to throw the ball a lot. So that'll be something I'm interested to watch, but there's not a lot of like really good talent on this UCLA team. And I think they only won by 3 points against Hawaii. Granted, it was on the island in week 0, so that's never what you want to go do. But that Hawaii team is bad. So it's not exactly the best offense that Oregon will play this year. But I think the Ducks should take full advantage of that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple interceptions going on Saturday.
Well, I was just going to say, like, Garber's, I think you're right in that. I think he's a perfectly fine quarterback, but they're asking him, like, the role he's in doesn't feel like the right role for him. You know what I mean? Because to me, it feels like you see this in basketball a lot, where you have a guy who, if he's just asked to be the spot up shooter, he's fine hitting a bunch of shots and being a nice complementary player. But if you're like, let's run the entire offense and he touches the ball every possession and everything's going through, it doesn't work. It kind of feels like that with Garber's. Again, I'm not a UCLA writer. I'm sure this has maybe been talked about, or maybe this is the opposite of what they've seen. But it feels like they're asking him to just win them football games. And I think he's somebody that would be much better served as like a game manager in an offense where Like he'd probably be a much better fit. This is probably true for a variety of reasons, playing in an offense like Oregon's than an offense like UCLA's. And I know that's really obvious, but just like an offense where it's like your point guard, just get the ball up quick, just kind of make the easy decisions. When
That's
they're
what
asked,
he did last year.
Yeah, and it was pretty good. He had 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. So
yeah, and it was 67 completion percentage. Like,
so I just feel like he's kind of miscast a little bit, and I think that's part of their problem. And again, this isn't a UCLA podcast, so I'm not trying to get too far into it. But this is who you're playing this week, and to your point, Jared, like I'm sure we'll do a prop on turnovers forced. This is a game where Oregon could easily force 2 or 3 turnovers and maybe have one go the distance or something, just based upon the type of player I've been watching so far. What about the defense, Jared? Did you have anything there?
I think the defense can get easily gashed. I mean, again, if you want to go watch what I think Oregon will try to do, go watch UCLA against Indiana. Excuse me, I almost said Idaho. They did a great job. Indiana did on just setting up the run and gashing them through the air and just having better players. I think that UCLA's secondary isn't good. I don't think they just don't have the guys, and a lot of teams don't on paper to stick up with Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson and the occasional Trayshawn Holden. But and you can feel better as an Oregon fan, like you said to begin the show, Eric, like how Oregon's offensive line held up against Oregon State's defensive line. Because UCLA's defensive front is pretty good. They have some good players. I mean, their best player is Medrano, their inside linebacker, who leads the team in total tackles. I think he leads the team in tackles for loss. Yeah, he does. Like he's a real dude. He's a guy who could play the next level, who could say he's transferring, and nearly every team in the country would want him on their defense. So, like that's a guy to look out for. But I think if Oregon can really control the running game and just like they did against Oregon State, it's like, hey, we're going to run, get 6 yards of carry. You guys are going to bring more players in the box. All right, cool. We're going to go hit Tez, Terrence, Trayshawn, Evan down the field. Like this could be a pretty like cut and dry offensive attack, in my opinion. Just establish the run, make sure Dylan doesn't get sacked, like keep him under from pressure. I think it could be pretty cut and dry because I don't think the defense is really anything special. I mean, they're giving up. I just had it in front of me. They're giving up 387 yards a game. It's not exactly what you want to see. 295 of it through the air.
Yeah, and that's because it's been available, right? It's been what I mean. You watch the Indiana game in particular. Their quarterback, I think it's Rourke. He was great. Yeah. He looked great in that game.
Awesome.
But there were a lot of situations where it was like, oh, that guy's just uncovered in the middle of the field, rifle shot, 30-yard gain. Yeah. That guy's no one's near him on the boundary, rifle shot, 15-yard gain. I imagine Oregon's approach here will be kind of similar, like you said, to what we saw against Oregon State, where it's established the run game because, if there is a strength to this UCLA defense, it's there. And if that can create even more separation in the pass game because the defense has to attribute for the run game, I could see this getting ugly. I think this game does have a chance to get really ugly, but ultimately to me, and we'll get into score predictions on our Thursday pod, ultimately to me, this is going to come down to Oregon. And just like, do they play clean?
Yeah.
Do they play at the standard? If they just carbon copy what we saw in Corvallis and just bring that thing down and paste it in Pasadena, this game should be another 30-point win. They're very much capable of doing something similar here. But I also think UCLA is a team where, like, if you make a bunch of mistakes and UCLA doesn't, and because that's been UCLA's story on offense in part, is A, they can't run the ball, and B, even when they have nice drives, they usually turn it over.
Right. They have 6 this year.
I think all of Garbers, by the way, he had 4 interceptions and 2 lost fumbles. So if this becomes a game where Oregon's the one who's making a lot of mistakes, like we saw against Idaho and Boise State, and UCLA actually does play a clean game, this could be something that gets a little too close for comfort late, and maybe there's some nervousness in the fourth quarter. But I really do think if Oregon plays its A game, it doesn't really matter what UCLA does. Oregon should be able to move the ball and have a lot of success. And frankly, if you build the lead against this UCLA team, I think it's pretty much lights out.
Yeah, 100%. I think, honestly, I mean, that's how Oregon could play against a lot of their opponents this year. They still have on paper and on the field, like usually, I don't know, 6 or 7 of the best 10 players who are on, like, compared in the game. So yeah, I don't think it's too much of a script change. And like Oregon did have the blowout win against Oregon State, obviously, but there's still 2 really close games against Idaho and Boise State. Like, there is a chance for things to go awry, but I really think that if Oregon just sticks to the script and actually executes, I mean, they can put up points. And again, like I think LSU is a good offense and Nussmeier is a pretty good quarterback, but I don't know how many people would take him over Dylan Gabriel and what Oregon has around him. So I think it could very easily be like a 20-30 point blowout and maybe a little Dante Moore showing in Pasadena. Ooh. Yeah. A little fourth quarter Dante.
I hope we see a little more fourth quarter Dante, because we didn't see a ton in Corvallis, but the parts we did see were really encouraging. So I'd love for that to be the outcome. And frankly, you look at the rest of the schedule, there are certainly games where Oregon could create enough separation to get ahead, but to get him in the game, I should say. But we've seen how that happens. Sometimes games are weird and wonky. So if there's an opportunity to do that in Pasadena, I'm sure they'll take advantage of that. Is there anything else? Because I think I look at this game and I'm kind of surprised we did 30 plus minutes, just because I look at it and go, aside from there being, maybe this is just the last note, is there's a ton of players that would play at Oregon that are on UCLA's roster. And obviously Oregon has Dante Moore, who we just talked about. So if you are a fan of either team, you will be seeing potentially some familiarity on the field in the other uniform. And that's kind of like just a small thing. And some of these players for UCLA are like really key players, whether it be Brian Addison, who's one of their top safeties, Jalen Davies is one of their top corners, and obviously Maliki Matavao is, I think, second or third in the team in receptions as their number one tight end. So I think most Oregon fans probably were aware of that going in, but just a little reminder of like, yeah, you're going to see part of the thing with the transfer portal is these guys take off. The other part is they go other places, and you might see them on the schedule. And this is certainly a weekend where you're going to see a little more than normal.
Yeah, if you hear a name on the broadcast and go, "Oh, that's familiar," like then it probably is, because there's 4 or 5 Oregon players on that UCLA team. I think 4.
Four that are healthy. Keanu Williams, unfortunately, out for the year, but yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So yeah, don't be surprised if you hear a name and you're like, that triggered something in my brain, like core memory unlocked. Like, I remember that name. It's probably going to be somebody that used to play for Oregon. But yeah, I don't have anything else, if I'm being frank.
Yeah. If you're being frank, then our show is done. Let's call it.
All right. I'll be frank. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Once again, leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. That'd be great. We would greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment saying something nice about us, just for a change. Yeah, just something else. So for Erik Skopil, I'm Jared Mack. Thank you all for listening.
Talk to you later, folks.